Now, as you probably know, the trailer for the next Avengers movie titled Endgame has dropped today. And to put it mildly, it looks great and gets me hyped despite the fact it really doesn't show much of the movie. In fact, most of the trailer is just Tony Stark or Iron Man coming to terms with the fact that he's failed and is about to die alone somewhere in space. And on his burnt out helmet, he's recording a message for Pepper that he likely realizes has no chance of ever reaching her. And as I was watching it for the third time or so, my mind drifted to Star Wars because, well, my mind always drifts to Star Wars whether I like it or not. And I couldn't help but wonder what the first teaser trailer for Episode 9 is going to be like, and what it could have been like if Episode 8 had been a much different movie. Because instead of Tony Stark, I imagined Luke Skywalker sitting there alone, maybe in the Millennium Falcon set adrift somewhere in space, talking to the melted helmet of Darth Vader, that perhaps he got his hands on in an alternate version of Episode 8, after he'd confronted Kylo Ren, and he's apologizing to his father for failing him, for letting Ben fall to the dark side and not stopping Snoke when he could have, and he's coming to terms with the fact that, despite his best efforts, he can't win this fight and the dark side is going to prevail. And I know some of you out there might be like, whoa, Thor, I thought you hated the fact that Luke failed in Episode 8, and gave up, and that he wasn't all-powerful and didn't save the day. Even though, yeah, in a way he does save the day at the end of Episode 8, by helping the last members of the Resistance escape. But the fact that Luke gave up isn't in itself the reason I didn't like or agree with the character in Episode 8. Instead, I didn't like that we didn't see Luke's failure, what actually broke him, other than in a quick flashback with virtually no context. Whereas in Infinity War, we not only saw a moment that could have shattered the man Tony Stark was, that being when Peter Parker died in his arms, we fully understood why that was so devastating for him, because previous movies had set up their relationship. We'd seen how Tony Stark took this kid under his wing, and not only became like a mentor to him, but almost like a father. We understood why Tony felt responsible for him, and for what ultimately happened to him. And granted, Star Wars didn't have the luxury of setting up the relationship between Luke and Ben Solo, or Kylo Ren, in multiple previous movies. And yes, something did have to happen between them, or to Ben, since it's already been established Luke had been training a new generation of Jedi, and Ben was the one who turned on him and destroyed it all. However, when such a character-defining moment is shown in a flashback, and again with very little context around it, and it conflicts greatly with how the character was the last time we saw him, which in the case of Luke is triumphant and seemingly resolved at the end of Return of the Jedi, some people are automatically going to reject it. They're going to say you didn't earn the change in that character. They're going to say you didn't sell me on Luke utterly giving up on everything and wanting to die with just one flashback. And going back to Tony Stark in the new Avengers trailer, where he's talking about his impending death, if somehow some new young hero finds him in this ship, and just go along with me for a minute because this obviously isn't going to happen, and for whatever crazy reason this new young hero happened to have an old Iron Man helmet, and tried to hand it to him, and Tony took it and discarded it and said, sorry kid, I'm done doing this hero thing, we might be disappointed to learn Iron Man had given up, but we would understand it and likely accept it, because the previous movies have sold us on it, that he wouldn't want to lead another young hero to ruin. However, if you've been stuck in a time loop for the past 6 years or so, or haven't seen an MCU movie since the first Avengers, which ends with Tony Stark willing to give his life to save humanity, and further shows his future plans for the Avengers and Avengers Tower, which of course is basically him embracing the idea of being a superhero, which, when you think about it, isn't all that much different from Luke's ending in Return of the Jedi. Anyway, if you've just come off seeing that first Avengers movie and then watched a scene like the one I described a few moments ago, where a new young hero hands an old Iron Man helmet to a grumpy-looking Tony Stark, and then Tony throws it away, you're not going to so quickly buy that. You're going to be utterly confused, in fact, even if later in the movie everything that happened with him and Peter gets explained in a quick flashback. You're still going to have a hard time believing a man that once was willing to give his life, who was a founding member of the Avengers, would ever give up. Next up in the Avengers Endgame trailer, we have Black Widow talking about how Thanos did exactly what he said he was going to do. And all the chills I would have gotten if, in the Episode 9 trailer coming up, we'd be able to hear perhaps Leia saying, my son did exactly what he said he was going to do. He finished what Vader started. And yes, I certainly understand Carrie Fisher is gone now, and Leia's role in the next movie will be limited. But just imagine that line spoken by her if, thus far in both movies, Kylo Ren would have been shown to be virtually unstoppable when he wanted to be, if when he embraced the darkness and rejected the light pulling on him, he became something even more terrifying than Vader. And imagine if he'd bested Rey at every turn, and perhaps fooled and manipulated her into joining him on the dark side, and they worked together to destroy Snoke towards the end of Episode 8. But afterwards, Kylo turned on her, told her he would be greater than any Sith and didn't need an apprentice as they once did, and that he only used her to defeat Snoke before promptly almost killing her and leaving her for dead. The Endgame trailer then concludes with Captain America talking about how they've lost and failed, and that they're basically down to one last desperate attempt in the wake of that failure. And of course, this is where you could have had Rey talking about her failures, how her weakness, her desire to belong to something, led her to the dark side and to be used by Kylo Ren to help him destroy Snoke, which gave rise to something far worse. Imagine how we'd be rooting for Rey right now if she'd been shown as no match for Kylo Ren time and time again, but despite her failure, was willing to face him again. Unfortunately, that's not what the Episode 9 trailer will look like at all. Instead, this next Star Wars movie, conceivably the final one in the Skywalker Saga, will have to manufacture reasons within itself that make us care about how this is all going to end, because the two previous movies in the sequel trilogy have failed to set up a final chapter that has any real tension going into it. Because despite the relatively bleak state of affairs the Resistance finds itself in right now, being down to their last dozen or so members and all, they have Rey on their side. And considering she beat Kylo Ren not only the first time they fought each other, but the first time she'd ever even used a lightsaber, I'm not all too worried about her being able to beat him again. Hell, the second time they battled each other, they played to a draw in a match of tug of war, and afterwards, Rey was left with a scratch on the arm and the emotional scar of being unable to turn from the dark side, the murderer she'd just met a few days ago. And please don't get me wrong here, I in no way want to sound like I'm reveling in the fact that Episode 9 is likely going to be crushed by Avengers Endgame at the box office next year. I am a huge fan of Marvel, yes, but I always have been and will be a bigger fan of Star Wars. It's a passion of mine, and it's sad to see how many fans are turning away from it right now because of what seems to be a lack of vision or the absence of any real plan for the franchise. And it blows my mind that Lucasfilm couldn't come up with and execute a plan for 3 movies, whereas Marvel, or the MCU, over the course of 10 years now, has perfectly executed a plan that had 3 phases and consisted of roughly 20 movies. A plan that has made them the undisputed king of franchises right now, and has the entire world buzzing and excited for the movie that will be the culmination of everything they've done up to this point. And no, I'm not giving up on Episode 9 or Star Wars in general. I'm a long way from that yet. But it's such a shame that they didn't sit down and plan the whole sequel trilogy out in advance. It's a shame they didn't look at the previous 2 trilogies and ask how to continue that story in the best possible way. It's a shame that someone who has lived and breathed Star Wars his whole life is more excited to see Marvel's Endgame Avengers movie over Lucasfilm's No Game Plan Episode 9. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me which one you're more excited for and why. Avengers Endgame or Star Wars Episode 9. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars and a little Marvel. And until next time, thanks for watching.